The house on Willow Lane. There was a small house on Willow Lane that always smelled like cinnamon and sunlight. Every morning, Eleanor Miller, known to everyone as Grandma Ellie, would stand on her porch with her cup of tea, watching the hummingbirds hover over her rose bushes. The paint on the house was chipped, the gate squeaked every time it opened, and the wooden porch creaked under her feet. But to Ellie it was perfect. Every inch of it carried a piece of her life. Her husband, Robert, had built the house himself more than 50 years ago. His laughter still seemed to echo in the backyard whenever the wind passed through the trees. The cement path leading to the porch still bore the faint handprints of their son, David, pressed there when he was 5. Every wall held a story, every room a memory. Now 76, Eleanor's hair was silver, always tied in a soft bun. Her back ached sometimes, and her steps were slow, but her smile had not changed. She was the kind of woman people waved to when they passed her gate. She still baked cookies for the neighborhood children and brought flowers to the church every Sunday. Her son, David, had moved to London years ago. He called her every Sunday, his voice warm but always tinged with guilt. "Mom, I'll come visit soon," he'd say. "Just one more project, I promise." She'd laugh softly, pretending not to notice the emptiness in her heart. "Oh, sweetheart, don't you worry about me. I've got my roses, my bridge club, and my tea. I'm fine." But the truth was, some nights, when the wind rattled the windows and the old house groaned in its sleep, she missed him terribly. When David's wife, Sophie, and their little daughter Lily came to stay, Eleanor thought her loneliness had finally ended. Lily filled the house with joy again. Her giggles, her crayons, her bedtime stories. The house felt alive. But Sophie was different. She was beautiful, sharp, and always perfectly dressed, even at breakfast. She smiled when David called, but her voice turned cold when the call ended. She often said the house was too old-fashioned, or that the neighborhood was boring. She spent hours on her laptop, whispering on the phone, shutting her bedroom door. Eleanor tried not to judge. Maybe Sophie just needed time. Raising a child alone while her husband worked overseas wasn't easy. Still, something in her eyes, restless and calculating, always unsettled Eleanor. One afternoon, Sophie came into Eleanor's room with a bright smile and a folder in her hand. "Mom," she said sweetly, "I need your help with something. It's just a formality. Some insurance papers for David. You're listed as a nominee, so they need your signature." "Insurance?" Eleanor asked, adjusting her glasses. "Yes, just routine paperwork. Here, sign here and here. It's nothing serious." The print was small, full of legal words Eleanor didn't understand. But she saw David's name near the top and trusted Sophie. Without a second thought, she signed. Sophie thanked her, kissed her cheek, and walked away smiling. Eleanor didn't know that she had just signed away her home. Over the next few weeks, small things began to go missing. At first, she thought she was just getting forgetful. Her pearl earrings disappeared. Then her engagement ring. Then, one morning, she opened her jewelry box to find her mother's gold locket gone. The one she'd worn every Sunday for 50 years. Her heart broke. She searched everywhere, in drawers and under cushions, in the laundry and between books. When she finally asked Sophie, the young woman didn't even look up from her phone. "Mom, you really need to keep track of your stuff. You're always forgetting things lately." Eleanor felt a sting of shame. Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe she really was losing her memory. But something deep inside whispered that she wasn't wrong. Something darker was happening. A week later, 2 men in suits appeared at her front door. "Mrs. Miller?" one asked politely. "We're here regarding the property on Willow Lane." "Congratulations on the sale." Eleanor frowned. "The what?" "The sale of your home, ma'am. We just need you to confirm the handover date." Her heart began to pound. "This house isn't for sale," she said firmly. The men looked at each other in confusion. One flipped through his folder, pulled out some papers, and handed them to her. Her breath caught when she saw her own signature at the bottom. She stared at the document. It wasn't an insurance form. It was a deed transfer. Her house, her only home, had been sold, and the signature was hers. Her knees gave out, and she sank onto the porch steps. The men, uncomfortable, mumbled their apologies and left her there in shock. When she stumbled back inside, the house was eerily quiet. Sophie's room was empty. Her clothes were gone. Lily's toys gone too. The drawers were bare. The woman she had trusted had vanished, taking her granddaughter with her. Eleanor's trembling hands reached for the phone. She called David in London, but his line went straight to voicemail. Through her tears, she left a message. "David, please call me. Something terrible has happened." That night, the house felt colder than it ever had before. She sat by the window, the ticking clock loud in the silence. Her Bible lay open on her lap, though she could barely see the words through her tears. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. It was Mark Sanders, her next-door neighbor and longtime friend. He had known Eleanor and Robert for more than 30 years. One look at her face, and his smile faded. "Ellie, what happened?" he asked gently. "They said I sold the house, Mark," she whispered. "But I didn't. I swear I didn't." She handed him the papers, her hands shaking. He took one glance and went pale. "Ellie, this isn't insurance paperwork. This is a property transfer deed." Her breath caught. "She told me it was just a formality." "Sophie." "She said it was for David." Mark clenched his jaw, anger flashing in his eyes. "You trusted her. Anyone would have." They spent the next few days calling offices, trying to untangle the truth. The deed was valid. The signatures matched. The notary stamp was real. Sophie had sold the house to a fake company under her own name and disappeared. Everything Eleanor had was gone. Her home, her jewelry, her security, her peace. That night, she sat alone on the porch swing, wrapped in a shawl that still smelled faintly of her husband. The moonlight glowed softly on the worn boards beneath her feet. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Robert, if you can hear me, I failed. I didn't protect what you built." A tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away with trembling fingers. For a long moment, she just sat there, listening to the quiet. Then, slowly, something inside her began to shift. The grief hardened into resolve. She straightened her back and looked toward the dark horizon. "No," she murmured. "This isn't over. Not yet." The wind rustled through the trees as if the house itself was listening. Eleanor took a deep breath, stood up, and went inside. For the first time in days, she didn't feel helpless. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to fight back. Part 2. The missing daughter-in-law. Eleanor hardly slept that night. The wind pressed against the windows, making the house groan like it was mourning with her. Every creak of the floorboards reminded her that this was no nightmare. Her home, her life's foundation, was slipping away because of a signature she had trusted someone to guide her through. When morning came, she brewed tea she could not drink. The jasmine scent that usually comforted her now made her stomach twist. She stared at the old phone on the kitchen counter until her shaking hands finally lifted it. David answered on the second ring, his voice bright and unsuspecting. "Hey, Mom. I got your message." "What's wrong?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "David, Sophie's gone. She took Lily. And the house," her voice broke. "The house isn't mine anymore." There was silence on the line, the kind that steals the air from a room. "What do you mean the house isn't yours?" "She told me to sign some insurance forms," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "But they were property papers. She sold the house. Everything's gone." David's disbelief turned into panic, then anger. "She wouldn't, Mom, that's impossible. She couldn't have done that without me knowing." "She did," Eleanor whispered. "Mark checked the papers. It's all legal. She used a fake company." On the other end of the line, David swore softly. "I'm coming home. Right now." "David, don't." But the line went dead. 2 days later, David's taxi pulled up to the curb outside the old blue-gated house. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his suit rumpled from the long flight. He stepped out, took one look at his mother standing on the porch, and ran to her. She fell into his arms, sobbing like a child. "I'm so sorry, David. I didn't know." He held her tighter. "Mom, don't apologize. You were tricked." When they went inside, the emptiness of the house hit him. The furniture was still there, but the warmth was gone. Sophie's perfume no longer lingered in the hallway. Lily's drawings had been stripped from the refrigerator door. The small family photographs Sophie had insisted on displaying were missing too. David sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples. "I can't believe she'd do this. I thought she loved us." Eleanor placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "She loved something, David, but it wasn't us." That afternoon, Mark came over again, bringing a folder of copies he'd made from the county records. He placed them carefully on the table. "The company that bought your house doesn't exist," he said. "The address on the paperwork leads to an empty lot in Fresno. I did some digging. Sophie registered the company herself 6 months ago. She's been planning this for a while." David stared at the documents in disbelief. She used my name for the transaction? Mark nodded. Parts of it. She forged a few details to make it look like you were aware. Eleanor closed her eyes. All that time she was smiling in this kitchen, pretending to be family. David's jaw tightened. We're going to the police. At the Santa Rosa Police Department, Detective Carla Reyes listened patiently as David and Eleanor told their story. She was in her early 40s, calm but sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who missed nothing. When they finished, she leaned forward. This isn't the first case I've seen like this. Real estate fraud targeting the elderly happens more often than people realize. But if what you're saying is true, and it sounds like it is, we can prove it. David handed her the folder Mark had prepared. Everything's in here. The fake company registration, the sale documents, even a copy of the notary stamp. Carla flipped through the pages, then looked up. You did half my work for me. I'll file this with the district attorney today. We'll start by tracing the account where the money from the sale was deposited. Eleanor sat silently, clutching her handbag. Detective, I just want my granddaughter safe. Please find them. Carla's expression softened. We will, Mrs. Miller. I promise. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor and David stayed with Mark while the investigation unfolded. The waiting was torture. Every phone call made her jump. Every car that passed made her hope Lily was inside waving at her through the window. One evening, while David paced the living room on yet another call with the bank, Eleanor sat quietly on the couch, staring at the empty space where Lily used to play with her dolls. Do you think she's okay? Eleanor whispered. David put the phone down and knelt beside her. I think she misses you as much as you miss her. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. She's only 7. She must be so scared. David's voice cracked. I'll find her, Mom. I swear. It was nearly 3 weeks later when Detective Reyes called. We've located Sophie, she said. She's in Las Vegas. She tried to sell the jewelry she took from your mother's house. The pawn shop owner ran the items through our stolen property list. She's in custody. David gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. What about Lily? She's safe, Reyes replied. We have her with child services until family can take her home. Eleanor let out a sob that sounded more like relief than pain. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight in her chest lift. When they drove to Las Vegas the next morning, Eleanor couldn't stop staring at the desert rolling past the window. I can't believe this is real, she murmured. David reached over and squeezed her hand. We're getting Lily back. That's what matters. At the police station, they were led into a small room where a social worker waited with a sleepy little girl holding a stuffed rabbit. The moment Lily saw her grandmother, she broke free from the woman's grasp and ran straight into Eleanor's arms. Grandma, she cried. Eleanor hugged her tightly, tears falling freely. Oh, my sweet girl. I've missed you so much. David wrapped his arms around both of them. We're together now. No one's taking you away again. Later that day, they saw Sophie through the glass of the interrogation room. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had once lived in their home. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired. She glanced up briefly as they passed but didn't speak. David stopped for a moment, anger and sadness tangled in his eyes. Why, Sophie? He whispered, though she couldn't hear him. You had a family that loved you. Eleanor tugged gently at his sleeve. Let her answer to God now, David. Let the law handle the rest. Back in Santa Rosa, the district attorney's office moved quickly. The sale was declared fraudulent, the deed voided. Within 2 months, the house on Willow Lane was legally returned to Eleanor. The morning the official papers arrived, she stood at the gate, the crisp document in her hands, sunlight warming her face. David and Lily stood beside her, watching. Eleanor smiled through tears. Your grandfather built this house with his bare hands, she said softly. I thought I'd lost it forever. But love finds its way back. Lily slipped her small hand into her grandmother's. Can we plant more roses, Grandma? Eleanor laughed, a sound the house hadn't heard in a long time. Yes, sweetheart. We'll plant as many as you like. David looked at the two of them and exhaled deeply. We'll start over. Right here. Eleanor nodded. The pain was still there, but so was peace. She had lost almost everything, yet somehow gained something stronger. Proof that love, truth, and persistence could still win. That night, as the stars shimmered over Willow Lane, the old house felt alive again. Eleanor sat on the porch swing, the soft creak echoing in the quiet air, and whispered into the night. We made it, Robert. We're home. Part 3. The courtroom and the crossroads. The morning of the trial dawned gray and quiet. The mist from the Pacific had rolled inland, covering Santa Rosa in a thin veil that matched the heaviness in Eleanor's chest. She stood by the window, her fingers tracing the edge of the curtain, watching the street slowly wake. David came in wearing a dark suit, his tie slightly crooked. "You ready, Mom?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she said softly. She picked up her old handbag, the same one she had carried to the police station weeks ago. It still smelled faintly of lavender and ink. Lily was at school with Mark's wife. Eleanor had insisted she shouldn't see any of this. "She deserves her innocence a little longer," she had said. At the courthouse, the marble floors gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights. Reporters lingered near the entrance. Real estate fraud cases rarely made local headlines, but this one had the perfect ingredients: betrayal, family, and redemption. When Eleanor and David entered, Sophie was already seated with her lawyer. Her once sleek hair was tied in a loose bun, her eyes hollow. She didn't look up. David clenched his jaw but said nothing. Eleanor placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Let the truth speak for us," she whispered. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Judge Karen Liu, entered promptly at 9. The courtroom rose, then settled into uneasy silence. The district attorney, a composed man in his 40s named Andrew Park, began his opening statement. He spoke clearly, laying out the chain of deceit: how Sophie had manipulated Eleanor, forged documents, and created a fake company to steal her home and savings. Sophie's lawyer countered with a story about emotional strain, confusion, and misunderstandings within a family. Eleanor listened quietly, her fingers tightening around the small silver cross she wore around her neck. When her turn came to testify, she stood slowly, every step toward the witness stand feeling like wading through memories. She took the oath, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Mrs. Miller," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell the court how you came to sign the documents in question?" Eleanor nodded. "She told me they were insurance papers. My late husband handled those things, so I trusted her. She said it would protect the house for Lily's future. Did you have any reason to doubt her?" "No," Eleanor said, her voice breaking. "She called me Mom. She made me soup when I was sick. She tucked my granddaughter into bed every night. I thought she was family." The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens. "Mrs. Miller," the defense lawyer said sharply during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you sometimes have trouble understanding financial paperwork?" Eleanor straightened. "I'm old, not foolish. I may need glasses, but I know the difference between love and lies." A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Liu's lips curved slightly before she regained composure. When she stepped down, David took her hand. "You did good, Mom," he whispered. Over the next few days, witnesses came and went. Mark testified about discovering the forged documents. Detective Reyes explained how the money trail led directly to Sophie's private account in Nevada. Then Sophie took the stand. Her lawyer advised her to show remorse. She tried. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," Sophie said softly. "I was drowning in debt. I thought if I sold the house, we could start fresh somewhere else." David stood abruptly, but the judge's gavel struck. "Mr. Miller, sit down." He sat, his eyes fixed on Sophie. "You didn't just sell a house," he muttered under his breath. "You sold trust." Sophie avoided his gaze. "I made mistakes," she said, voice trembling. "But I love my daughter. I never wanted to hurt her grandmother." Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. There was pity in her eyes, but not forgiveness, at least not yet. The verdict came after 2 hours of deliberation. The jury found Sophie guilty of fraud, forgery, and identity theft. When the judge read the sentence, 5 years in prison, with the possibility of early release for cooperation, Sophie's shoulders slumped. David exhaled sharply, part relief, part sorrow. Eleanor's hand found his. "It's over now," she said quietly. "At least in this room." But she knew healing didn't come with a gavel strike. Weeks later, Eleanor received a letter from Sophie. The handwriting was shaky, the paper lined and faintly creased. "Mrs. Miller, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I see Lily's face every night. Please tell her I love her. I know I can't undo what I did, but I hope someday you'll believe I wasn't always this lost." Sophie Eleanor sat by the window for a long time after reading it. Outside, the roses were blooming again, bright reds and soft whites swaying in the breeze. David found her there. You okay? She folded the letter carefully. I don't know. I think she meant it. But meaning doesn't erase damage. He nodded. Will you write her back? Maybe, she said. But not today. Today I'm going to live. As spring turned to summer, the house on Willow Lane came alive once more. Lily's laughter filled the garden. David had found work at a local design firm, and Eleanor had started volunteering at the senior center, teaching others how to recognize fraud and protect their property. Her small weekly class became unexpectedly popular. People came with questions, fears, and stories that mirrored her own. She listened to each one, offering what she could: knowledge, empathy, and hope. You're turning pain into purpose, Mark told her one afternoon as they packed up flyers. Eleanor smiled. If I can stop just one person from signing something they'll regret, then it's worth it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Eleanor found Lily sitting on the porch steps, staring at the horizon. What are you thinking about, my darling? Lily looked up. Mommy, do you think she still thinks about me? Eleanor's heart ached, but she smiled softly. Yes, sweetheart. Every day, I think. Will we see her again? Someday, Eleanor said gently. When she's ready to be better. Lily nodded thoughtfully and leaned against her grandmother's shoulder. Then I'll save her a rose. Eleanor's eyes glistened. That's a beautiful idea, Lily. They sat there together, watching the sky turn to gold, then pink, then purple. Months later, Eleanor visited the prison for the first time. David had offered to go with her, but she'd refused. This is something I have to do alone, she'd said. Sophie looked smaller than Eleanor remembered. Her eyes were tired, but when she saw Eleanor, they filled with tears. I didn't think you'd come, Sophie whispered. I didn't either, Eleanor admitted. She sat down across from her. I read your letter. I meant every word, Sophie said. I can't ask for forgiveness, but I needed to see you. To thank you for taking care of Lily. Eleanor's voice was calm but firm. She's safe. She's growing. She still loves you, you know. Sophie's lip quivered. Does she ever ask about me? Every night before bed, Eleanor said softly. And she's saving you a rose. Sophie's tears fell freely then. I don't deserve that. Maybe not, Eleanor said, standing slowly. But love doesn't wait for permission. You can earn it back if you choose. As she turned to leave, Sophie whispered, Thank you. Eleanor didn't look back, but her eyes were bright with something between pain and peace. That night back home, Eleanor sat on the porch swing once again, the same one she had shared with Lily so many times. The stars shimmered above her, gentle and endless. David came out with 2 mugs of tea. You went, didn't you? I did. How was it? Eleanor smiled faintly. Necessary. They sat in silence for a while, the crickets filling the gaps between words. Finally, she said, You know, David, losing the house, the trust, all of it, it broke me. But maybe it also built me into something stronger. He nodded. You've built us all stronger, Mom. She looked at him, her eyes soft. Promise me one thing. Anything. Teach Lily to forgive, but not to forget. I will, he said. And as the night deepened, the old house stood quietly behind them, its windows glowing like gentle eyes. It had seen deception, heartbreak, and redemption. And now, it stood as a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even shattered trust can give birth to unbreakable love. Part 4. The return of spring. 5 years passed like pages fluttering in the wind. The house on Willow Lane had changed, not in structure, but in soul. The garden was fuller, greener, alive with the laughter of a child who had grown taller and stronger. Lily was 11 now, curious and kind, with her mother's eyes but her grandmother's heart. Eleanor had aged too, her silver hair now fully white, but her spirit seemed lighter. She'd become something of a local legend, the grandma who fought back. Newspapers had written about her story. Students invited her to speak at community centers. She didn't talk about revenge or loss, but about awareness, compassion, and forgiveness. Yet, despite her smiles and speeches, there was a part of her heart that remained tender, the part where Sophie lived in memory. Every year on Lily's birthday, Eleanor sent Sophie a small photograph, a picture of Lily with her birthday cake, or in her school play costume, or holding the year's first rose from the garden. Sophie wrote back too, short letters filled with humility and longing. I'm learning carpentry, one letter read. It keeps my hands busy and my mind quiet. Another said, I've started helping in the library here. Books remind me of the world beyond these walls. And finally, one day, a different letter came. Mrs. Miller, the warden told me my release date has been confirmed, March 12th. I know I can't just walk back into your lives. But I want to try. I want to be someone Lily can be proud of, even if all I can do is stand across the street and watch her from afar. With remorse, always, Sophie Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Her hands trembled as she folded it. She didn't tell David immediately. She needed to process it first. That night, she sat by the window, staring out at the rose bushes. It was early spring, and tiny green buds had just begun to appear. The promise of new life, delicate but unstoppable. When she finally told David, he was silent for a long while. "She's done her time," Eleanor said softly. "She's still Lily's mother." "I know," he said. "I just don't want her to hurt you again." "She might," Eleanor admitted. "But forgiveness isn't about risk. It's about release." David nodded slowly. "Then we'll do this your way." March came with gentle rain and the scent of jasmine in the air. On the morning of Sophie's release, Eleanor found herself pacing the porch. She had told herself she wouldn't go, that it wasn't her place anymore. But her heart had other plans. An hour later, she was sitting in her car outside the correctional facility. When Sophie walked out, wearing simple jeans and a gray sweater, she didn't notice Eleanor at first. Her hair was shorter, streaked with gray. Her face was thinner, but her eyes held something new, humility. When she finally saw the old car parked near the gate, her steps slowed. Eleanor stepped out. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then softly, Eleanor said, "You look tired." Sophie smiled faintly. "Prison isn't exactly restful." Eleanor's lips twitched. "No, I don't imagine it is." They stood there in silence, the years between them heavy but fragile. Finally, Eleanor took a deep breath. "Come home, Sophie. Not to stay, not yet. Just for lunch. Lily would like that." Sophie's eyes widened, glistening. "Are you sure?" "No," Eleanor said honestly. "But I'm trying." When they arrived at Willow Lane, Lily was waiting on the porch, clutching a small vase. Inside it was a single red rose. "Mom," she whispered. Sophie froze. "Hi, sweetheart." Lily ran forward, not with the reckless speed of a small child, but with the cautious grace of someone who had been waiting for a long time. She stopped in front of her mother, studying her face. Then she held out the rose. "I saved this for you," she said. Sophie knelt down, tears spilling freely. "You remembered." "I never forgot," Lily said softly. "Grandma told me forgiveness takes time. I think enough time has passed." Sophie took the rose carefully, as if it might break. "Thank you," she whispered. Eleanor turned away, wiping her eyes discreetly. For a moment, the porch seemed to breathe again, as if the house itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Lunch was quiet, gentle. They talked about small things. Lily's school, David's job, the weather. The heavy topics remained unspoken, floating in the air like uninvited ghosts. But the air wasn't bitter anymore. It was cautious, hopeful. After the meal, Sophie offered to help with the dishes. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. As they stood side by side at the sink, Eleanor handed her a towel. "I used to think I'd never see you here again," she said quietly. "I used to think I didn't deserve to be," Sophie replied. Eleanor looked at her. Maybe we were both wrong. For the first time in years, Sophie smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "You know, this kitchen hasn't changed a bit." "Some things shouldn't," Eleanor said. "They remind us who we were before everything broke." Over the next few weeks, Sophie began visiting regularly. She didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not a place to stay, not even trust. She just showed up. She helped Eleanor weed the garden, took Lily to the library, and attended Sunday service at the little church down the street. At first, neighbors whispered, but over time, they began to greet her again. Not with full warmth, but with cautious civility. Eleanor watched all of this quietly. She still kept the property deed in her drawer, the one Sophie had tricked her into signing. But she no longer looked at it with bitterness. Instead, it served as a reminder of what she'd survived. One afternoon, while pruning the roses, Sophie said softly, "I'm applying for work at a carpentry shop downtown. They said they give second chances." Eleanor nodded. "You've earned one." Sophie looked up, surprised. "You mean that?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "You can't change the past, Sophie. But you can make the future worth forgiving." Summer arrived with long days and golden light. The house seemed fuller than ever. Laughter, meals, music, and healing. One evening, as the three of them sat on the porch swing, Lily asked, Grandma, do you think people can change completely? Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, then at Sophie. I think, she said slowly, people don't change completely. They remember who they were, and they decide to be better. Every day. That's what matters. Sophie reached for Lily's hand, and Eleanor's heart swelled at the sight. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Years later, when Eleanor's health began to fade, she called David and Sophie into her room. Lily, now a teenager, stood by the window, quiet and pale. On the nightstand sat a small wooden box, carved by Sophie, smoothed by love and time. Inside were three things: the property deed, a gold locket that had been recovered and returned after the trial, and a letter. Eleanor handed the box to Sophie. You know what this means? Sophie shook her head, tears in her eyes. No, I can't. You already did, Eleanor said softly. You earned it back, Sophie. Not just the house, the trust. David's hand found Sophie's shoulder. Mom, Eleanor smiled faintly. This house was never just wood and walls. It was a promise. And promises sometimes break, but they can be rebuilt. Her eyes flickered toward Lily. And it's her turn to keep it alive. Lily nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. I will, Grandma. I promise. Eleanor leaned back, her breathing shallow but peaceful. Good. Then my work here is done. When the morning came, the house on Willow Lane was wrapped in golden light. The roses outside had bloomed overnight, red, white, pink, a full spectrum of forgiveness. Sophie stood on the porch with Lily and David, holding the letter Eleanor had written before she passed. My dear family, if you're reading this, it means I've gone to join Robert. Don't be sad. Our love has simply changed form. This house is yours now, not because of ownership, but because of what you've all built together. Guard it not with locks, but with kindness. And remember, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing love over pain every single day. With all my heart, Eleanor Sophie folded the letter slowly. The wind carried the scent of roses through the air. Lily reached for her hand. We'll take care of it, Mom. Sophie looked up at the sky, blinking back tears. We will, sweetheart. We will. And as the sun climbed higher, casting warm light over the porch and the blooming garden, the old house stood strong and proud, a symbol of everything Eleanor had fought for: truth, redemption, and love reborn.